Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. I'm Ian Stone.
I'm Neil Munro.
So today we're talking about policy papers. ResPublica is a British independent policy think tank, and they've recently produced a policy paper that was entitled Hazardous Homes To Let, Protecting Renters from Asbestos. We had a read through of the paper, both of us have had a look through, and ultimately they're making 4 recommendations at the end of that paper. What they're proposing is to present this paper to MPs to get backing and then make legislative changes. Just wanted to have a chat through it, didn't we, really? Thought it was an interesting subject.
It is. There has been this gulf, this gap in legislation, UK law, where we've got things covered on a commercial point of view.
Yeah.
Whether they're followed and enforced is irrelevant in this scenario, because there's a massive gulf there. However, from what we're talking about, there is a fundamental gap and a fundamental shortfall, I believe, in the domestic scenario, and focusing here on the rented accommodation.
Yeah, rented accommodation, letting.
Yeah, and this could apply to councils, housing associations, private landlords.
Yeah.
They have a duty to provide a safe environment for their tenant.
Where do we stand at the moment with regards to what have they got to do asbestos-wise?
From a commercial point of view,
yeah.
So
that's the thing. We're talking about renting, but it's the commercial aspect of renting, isn't it?
So really, they have a duty to manage the non-domestic areas. So the non-domestic areas in that scenario will be somewhere like, in a block of flats, you've got communal staircases, bin cupboards, corridors, even down to a house. Technically, if there's more than one resident, the communal area will be the external and maybe an entrance lobby or something like that.
Yeah.
But they've also got a duty if they send employees into these properties.
Yeah.
So they've got a duty to protect those members of staff. So, for instance, a housing association will employ maintenance people that go on a regular basis to these properties to maintain or fix and repair certain elements. So they've got a duty there to then make sure that those works are not going to disturb asbestos. So
ultimately, and the way these kind of regulations are met are the fact of they will have asbestos surveys for communal areas. Like you said, in flats, communal areas would be a management asbestos survey of the stairwell, the entrance lobbies, bin cupboards, etc., up to the front doors of the actual flats within there.
Yeah, the duty to manage essentially stops there at the threshold.
However, when they're sending one of their workers in, again, they need to assess. So if it's, a new boiler installation, they would have a targeted refurbishment asbestos survey of the boiler and pipework, etc., and identify if there's asbestos or not before sending the workers in. So if there was, it needs dealing with. If there's no asbestos there, then that heating engineer can go in and work on that safely. But that is what we're saying is where the duty stops, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you living in your flat, you haven't got a survey of everything within your
potentially
areas.
There's no requirement to.
Yeah.
But having said that, there's no specific asbestos requirement. So there's no asbestos regulations in place for that. However, there is regulations in place for that landlord.
Yeah. I suppose that covers off. I mean, bits that are covered off are things like boilers and carbon monoxide,
damp.
Yeah.
But
asbestos isn't specifically named.
I don't know if it's named, but it's not specific asbestos legislation, should we say.
Yeah, okay. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's why they're putting this paper out there, that recommendations to be changed to legislation. And there's two approaches that they've kind of offered up as options, which one would be to extend the current Regulation 4, duty to manage asbestos, to then cover all parts of domestic premises, or create a whole new piece of legislation that covers asbestos in domestic premises specifically. So, yeah, I mean,
I'm not sure if they're looking to just cover specifically landlord renters.
No, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's a bit unclear on that. I mean, I suppose if we take it in the vein of their paper is talking about hazardous homes to let, we'll just talk about it on the renting ability.
Yeah, I think there will be an issue if we were then talking about the entire private
domestic dwelling.
Yeah, domestic dwelling. But 100%, I agree with...
if you're renting, you want to rent somewhere safe.
Yeah.
And the only way to rent somewhere safe is to have each and every aspect of what might make it unsafe looked at, surely.
Yeah. It's like you mentioned earlier, a landlord has responsibilities to have a carbon monoxide and the boiler serviced on an annual basis.
Yeah.
They have a duty to make sure that it's fire compliant.
Yeah.
But not asbestos. So it's kind of like we've already got legislation in place to protect them on various hazards.
And that's the thing. We've seen it when that goes wrong, right? So Grenfell being one, that's obviously ongoing about what the issue was there, but there was definitely an issue.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, you read it in the news often that somebody's been carbon monoxide poisoned, possibly died from it, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And that's...
No smoke detector and there's a fire and they've died.
Yeah.
That's already in place for these domestic rented accommodation.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, that's ultimately, this is like what always happens with asbestos and other stuff.
Yeah.
Those other things, you can die instantly.
Yes.
If it goes wrong, you're dead. With asbestos, you're not going to die instantly. On the day, exactly. It's an issue that further down the line. And let's be honest, I mean, there's a lot of domestic dwellings out there that are let by landlords, by local authorities, private renters and private landlords, that they'll spend the bare minimum to get it to code, get it to the standard that it needs to be. And I mean, you know as well as I do, how many properties out there have got asbestos insulating board on the back of boiler cupboard doors that are completely unsealed, never been touched, and that are rubbing on the edge? How many times have we seen it? I don't even know, like thousands and thousands of times.
Yeah.
So there's exposures happening. We know of exposures that are happening in rented accommodation.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. When you look at the amount of asbestos that is present in ex-local authority housing, which were built, I don't know, 50s, 60s, 70s, the go-to material was asbestos. And it was job lot. You'd have ceiling coatings, floor coverings throughout. Like you said, asbestos boards on, protecting fire-sensitive areas, whether that be boiler cupboards, heating cupboards, boxing, out pipes, etc., throughout the property. So there's a big risk there.
There is, definitely.
And on the main scale of it, it's very hit and miss on, if we're talking local authorities, housing associations who own and rent thousands of properties. There is a broad spectrum of
how they go about it,
what they actually do in the domestic setting.
Yeah, definitely.
And I definitely think introducing some further regulation in that area would help standardise it across the country.
Definitely, it'd level the playing field of minimum requirements.
Yeah.
That are carried out.
And there's definitely some sliding scales. You got some housing associations who essentially treat it exactly the same.
Yeah.
So they inspect, they regularly re-inspect, each individual asbestos item in the property.
Yeah. They'll do management surveys.
In line with the duty to manage.
Yeah.
And then there's some which will do inspections just when they're going to do works.
Yeah, void properties, that kind of thing.
Void properties, if they've got heating or, the old decent homes, we're upgrading the properties, they'll do the surveys and deal with any asbestos then.
Yeah.
However, there's no ongoing inspection and monitoring of their degradation of the materials.
Yeah, we've done the bit for that one project. We've upgraded the kitchen and the bathroom, and that's all we've done in that property, and we've just left it.
Yes.
And even if there was asbestos identified in there, like you say, it's not then followed up with re-inspections after, because it's like, well, we don't have to.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that is a good point. I think, and ultimately it would help definitely in the management of asbestos, even if, because people aren't even notified if they've got asbestos in their property or not, whether it's even in a good condition or not. And that's the thing with like doing stuff in a rental property as well. Ultimately, you can most rental agreements are, you can do what you like as long as it doesn't degrade the detriment of...
You're not allowed to touch anything. Well, a lot of tenancy agreements are actually written, so you're not allowed to do anything. So that's how they get out of, if there was any case of, I disturbed asbestos.
Yeah.
And it's well, it's in your lease agreement. You're not allowed to do anything.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't have done it.
Some are written that you can do whatever, decorate it however you want, but it's to be returned to the original. So if you like lime green and orange walls, crack on and paint them. However, when you come to moving out, you need to repaint it the magnolia that it was when you took on that rental property as well. So again, there's kind of different ends of the scale of what people can and can't do in properties. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that would be a good step forwards.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I know housing associations that treat it the same, so duty to manage, so they regularly inspect, update it, and actually inform the tenants. And that's another thing. So in a commercial setting, as the duty holder, you've got requirement to provide the asbestos information to anyone that may require it.
That is a good point, and that would go above and beyond what they're asking for here, and that would be a good addition.
So if the duty to manage applied to this domestic setting, then the tenants would have to be aware of the asbestos that's in their property. Now, there's lots of housing associations that don't provide that information to the tenant.
No.
And really, if you're living in a house, you want to bloody know so you don't touch it.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. You want to know the risks.
Because I'm pretty confident that there's millions of tenants out there who are unaware of what is actually in their property.
Yeah.
And they go about living in this property however they see fit, unaware of the potential hazards that may be present in there.
Well, definitely. I mean, stuff that I've seen with my own eyes, and you'll have seen the same. Boiler cupboards, ex-boiler cupboards where the heating's been completely changed. The boiler cupboard then becomes a store cupboard.
Yeah.
And store cupboards with asbestos insulating board linings.
It's the crap cupboard, isn't it? It's where everything just gets chucked in there.
It's where Trivial Pursuit gets shoved. It's where Monopoly gets shoved.
Yeah.
It's where Game of Life gets shoved.
Shoes, coats, you name it. And it's always stuffed in there, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always like you open the door and you get a million things for that.
Exactly. Again, that's causing possible issues and exposure to people. And I mean, ultimately, children are more susceptible to asbestos than what adults are as well. And where are they going to most likely be exposed? Well, one at school, which are covered by the duty to manage regulations, but secondly at home. And if there's no regulation covering stuff like boiler rooms where their Legos kept and their games are kept, well, then they're possibly getting exposed there. And at the same time, they're more susceptible as well. So for me, that's a no-brainer. That kind of, it helps across the board.
Yeah, I'm not too sure of the direction, but it definitely any increase in that area is only going to be a good thing. Because I do strongly think that there is a bit of a shortfall there.
Yeah, definitely. So the second recommendation they've made is to do with home information packs and the introduction of a home information pack to include a complete asbestos register of the premises. It would be provided to the home buyers from landlords and tenants, and essentially a domestic audit of all asbestos materials found within the internal and exterior of the property. So what we're talking about, or what they're talking about there, would be essentially a management survey to that flat, to that house, covering all areas that are required.
Why wouldn't you do this? It's the amount of information that you have to get. And particularly, again, you can't get a mortgage without having a
mortgageable property.
A mortgageable property, and the mortgage provider will send out a surveyor to check that the property is actually still fit.
Yeah.
And they're not going to lose money on it.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep.
They don't look at asbestos. All they're bothered about is what's kind of the rebuild value of that, and is it still fit? Is it going to be standing for the duration of the mortgage?
Yeah.
Why would you not include asbestos? The amount of surveys that you have to do, looking at flood risk, looking at potential hazards to the property. But asbestos is never a requirement.
Well, looking at it from another point of view, along the same vein, insurance companies. Why are insurance companies not asking for this information? Because if the shit hits the fan, they're going to be the ones paying for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, take, for instance, a house fire.
Yeah.
If a house fire happens and the house burns down, and there are bungalows and stuff out there that were built kind of post-World War II, where the external walls, asbestos cement, they've got asbestos insulating board soffits. And let's take that property for a second. There's a house fire, that burns down, the asbestos explodes, which it does, it delaminates and explodes and spreads across everywhere. You've got a whole kind of neighbourhood that's contaminated with asbestos that insurance company surely has got to pick up foot the bill for.
Yeah, potentially, mate. Definitely.
And if that's the case, why wouldn't the insurers want that? Because then they get to insure against that risk themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think with insurance, that is a good point, because I don't know what it is with insurance companies not communicating, or whether it is highlighted across the entire industry. But I'm just thinking about if you have a leak in your bathroom.
Yep.
And you want to claim on your insurance, they'll send out an assessor, won't they?
Yes.
For the claim.
Yes.
To go, yeah, okay, we're going to give you X to get that sorted.
Yeah.
Or we'll sort it out for you.
Yes.
Some of them do that, don't they?
They do, yeah. They'll confirm it's a claim, and then they'll send their own team in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's every insurance company, but some of the insurance companies will flag that. So if you've had a leak through your ceiling and there's texture coating on the ceiling, they will flag that needs to be that needs sampling, that needs to be tested. So asbestos is on the radar of some insurance companies, but probably not all insurance companies.
Well, I mean, we regularly do management surveys for people, and I don't know if it's the mortgage company requesting it or the insurers requesting it, because I think we've had both, where they've said, I need this for this property. So again, on the flip side, you're right, there are people...
Some awareness,
some insurance companies, some mortgage brokers and mortgage companies asking for this information to make sure the asset is okay, and if the people don't pay their bills, then they can get the money back for their asset.
Yeah.
But it's not across the board.
Yeah. And to add to that, I'm flipping it over to the other side. So if you are, and I know we're talking about rented in this scenario, but if it was across the board, if you're buying a property or you're potentially renting a property, as the person that's going to be living in this property,
surely you want to know.
You want to know. And you only know if you know. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So if you don't, asbestos is not on your radar. You've never come across it. You don't work in that kind of industry. It's never been your day-to-day sort of thing on the radar. You're going to have a clue. So, but if you had somebody that was saying, okay, if you're going to rent this property, here's the information pack for the property.
Yeah.
It's then going to be on everyone's radar.
Yes.
If you're going to buy a house and as part of that sale, they had to provide you with an asbestos survey, it's going to be on your radar. You're going to know it's safe.
I mean, look at the stuff that is provided and is required. Energy efficiency certificate, right? If a property isn't energy efficient. Okay, it's not great for the planet from now and in the future. But ultimately, if it costs you, I don't know, an extra £1,000 to keep warm that year because your windows are crap, no one's going to die from that.
No.
But if there's a property where there's asbestos in a bad condition and exposures are happening, ultimately somebody can die from that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, why not include it? So for me, that's, again, a no-brainer.
It is a no-brainer. And from, you tackled the health point of view, but just say if you're buying a property, you're renting a property, and your idea is to, actually, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to take these walls out. I'm going to extend the kitchen. I'm going to make the bathroom bigger. And
I'm going to take the ground floor and make it, instead of loads of little box rooms, I'm going to go open
it all up. Okay, well, it's all good. You know, you've got
the money.
You got the property on a good price. You've got money to do the refurb. You come to do the refurb. Lo and behold, the contractor coming. Oh, we just need to do an asbestos survey before we do this, and they identify, thousands of pounds worth of asbestos. Suddenly that puts your project out the window because you can't afford it.
You can't proceed.
You've basically bought a house that's
bought a dud. Yeah. No, that's a very, very, very valid point.
So there's a lot.
Commercially, it makes sense.
Commercially,
health-wise,
and it would push asbestos up the overall agenda.
Yeah, it puts it onto everybody's radar.
It's not suddenly just something that has to be done at work. It's suddenly it has to be done in everyday life.
Yeah.
So that's only going to improve everything, surely.
Yeah. The second part of kind of this point they were recommending is to serve and inform any contractors working on the premises about asbestos and the whereabouts of asbestos. And landlords and letting agencies would face penalties for failing to comply. Well, ultimately, that's already in place, I would argue, in the fact of Regulation 5. So as an employer sending somebody in to work in a premise, you need to identify whether asbestos is a risk or not. If there's no information available, you as an employer need to get that information. And whether that is through the homeowner or the landlord, or if they haven't got it, you as an employer need to have a asbestos survey carried out yourself, don't you?
Mm.
So essentially that's already in place.
Yeah.
I suppose it's stronger enforcement.
I was going to say, I think it's more of a focus on a local level to kind of, I think, take it up the agenda on a local basis so it's more enforced. So,
and specifically naming the landlord and the letting agent as protagonists that should get that carried out. So again, I don't see that as an issue. It kind of backs up what's already in place.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third thing they're recommending, local authorities to determine minimum penalties and set these minimum penalties for breaching asbestos regulations in domestic premises. What are your thoughts on that? It's
same again. It's kind of,
it's there in a roundabout fashion.
There is stuff in place. However, I suppose there's more of a targeted enforcement, and it's more on the agenda of local authorities as opposed to an overall scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a...
And that's it. I suppose when you look at it under local authority, they are generally more informed about these things than a private landlord.
100%.
So I suppose, again, bringing in minimum penalties for those groups.
The only thing with going to a local authority is local authorities are probably the biggest landlords in the areas.
Yeah.
So is there a conflict in that respect?
Yeah, you're asking the poacher to be gamekeeper.
Yeah.
Because if they're issuing out, take a traffic warden, if you're issuing out tickets for you've not done this, you've not done this, you've not done this, ultimately, like you said, I mean, the actual local authority...
I'm sticking it on my own car.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. Because local authorities, they do provide tenanting and renting in their areas in the thousands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the numbers of thousands.
They'll be the biggest landlord in the area.
Yeah. So, asking them to ticket their own car is a conflict.
Yeah.
Unless it's done completely departmentally separated and all the rest of it.
Well, it will be, but yeah.
Even then,
are they going to want to be in the headlines of, we stuck a ticket on this?
Yeah.
You're waving a flag about your own organisation.
Yeah. That is a bit difficult.
Yeah.
Definitely.
An independent body would be cleaner to enforce that.
Yeah, cleaner to enforce, and then there's no conflict of interest whatsoever. It can't be determined as a conflict. So, yeah, again, I think putting things...
The idea is there, I think maybe...
Putting things in place and then backing it up with fines and things like that, definitely, but it would have to be carried out, like you say, independently, a separate body or something, I think would be a good way. And then finally, the fourth thing that they've recommended is an asbestos awareness campaign, a public awareness campaign, reminding landlords, tenants of their respective duties and rights to kind of introduce compliance with the existing regulations, plus also any new regulations. I mean, that on its own, if there was solely just an awareness campaign, forget everything else that they're recommending, if there was an awareness campaign about not just the hidden killer like the HC did a few years ago, which was targeted at the workplace, just an overall campaign of asbestos was used in lots of buildings in the UK pre-1999. If you're disturbing the fabric of any building, domestic or commercial, then you may come across asbestos and it may be disturbed, which isn't a good thing. That can only be a good thing.
Any awareness into asbestos can only ever be a good thing.
I mean, if you bunch all four up, that would send it through the roof compared to where we're at now, because you've
100%,
you've got new restrictions, new things that people have to do. There's fines in place for not complying, and ultimately it's not kind of we've sprung these on you. They're saying, let's advertise the fact that asbestos is a killer. And it is. It's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think maybe changes do need to be considered just to get the money or to raise those awarenesses. Like, for instance, if you look at the recent sort of law changes that have happened over, the last sort of 5 to 10 years, GDPR, there was a change. But look at the traction that it got because of that change.
It became real.
There was a focus.
It wasn't just something we should do. It was like, no, it's now law. You've got to do this.
Yeah, and there was a big push on it, and everyone kind of panicked a little bit to go, oh, what are we doing? I don't know what we're doing.
What have we got to do?
Yeah. And we'd possibly need that.
No, you do need that, definitely.
Some legislation change, even if it is minor, just so we get that traction from the... You need to comply with these new changes.
You do need that, because if it's not law that you don't have to do something and just kind of, you should do this, there'll always be those that take it up and do comply. And then there'll always be those that don't bother and just ignore it. Even if it is best practice. It's kind of I'm all right, Jack. Mm-hmm. I don't give a shit. My tenants are fine the way they are. That's why I offer it to them at $5 or less a month than what the other ones do.
Yeah.
And there's always that market. Yes. Whereas if you create the market of, no, everybody's got to comply, and if you do not comply, there's big consequences, it just creates a better scenario for everybody in the long term for health issues. And as we know, asbestos is a massive, massive health issue.
Yeah.
So, just a bit of a review, like I say, of that policy paper that they put forward. I think I've read a lot of stuff over the years, and some stuff comes out as pie in the sky. It's never going to happen. Or we want to remove all asbestos in the next year scenario, which is ultimately ridiculous, impractical. Whereas I think this policy paper is kind of ticking the right boxes for the recommendations they've made for me.
Yeah, definitely. It ticks a box, which has been a gap in the asbestos market, the asbestos arena, where there is a potential dangerous element, a bit of a Wild West, nothing, it's unlawed.
Yeah.
It's not covered. It's not inspected.
Inside those four walls, you can do what you like.
Yeah.
Which isn't a good place to be, because who knows how many exposures are happening. And like I said earlier, from what I've seen over the years, I do know there are exposures happening.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, every day.
So, if you want to read up and have a look at the paper, like I said at the beginning, it was ResPublica. And if you Google them and the asbestos, I'm sure there'll be a link that comes up to that. Thanks for listening. Remember, asbestos first, not last.